at this
Yeah.
point? Okay, perfect. I will get that going.
And then will subsequent people who join, will they be added to the waiting room too, or will they just jump straight into the call?
I believe they should jump straight in, but I will keep an eye out on it and make sure that anyone who's behind, I'll get them in.
Very good.
Mikhail,
Thank you.
if you go to the participants list and the three little
Mhm.
dots, there should be an option that has a check mark in front of it that says Enable Waiting Room. Unclick that, and they should go directly in. That way you don't have to keep tabs on it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
I just got an email
Welcome
from
in.
my
Welcome in.
grandkid.
Hope everybody had a enjoyable and restful Thanksgiving. Now for the sprint to the Christmas break. I still see some folks joining, so I'll just give it another minute. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hope everybody had an enjoyable and restful Thanksgiving. We're joined today by a guest from OET's monitoring team, Eric Bennett. He's going to talk about monitoring. At some point during your grant term, you will be monitored. Most of you who were around last year experienced a TA version of monitoring, a bit of monitoring light, but you will all have a formal monitoring conducted by our monitoring team at some point. It looks like the team will conduct formal monitoring with 5 to 6 grantees starting in February, running through May. Each event will be a few days long, and so at this point, we're working to identify the weeks when everybody's available and then working to pin down the days and locations. The Ceja team will work alongside the monitors on those formal events, but we will then also conduct another round of TA in the spring with the rest of the grantees. Those will also start up in February or March. So expect the notices to start arriving after the first of the year. Similar to last year, you'll be asked to produce some documents so that we can review in advance of our meeting, and then we'll meet to go over those documents and any questions about your grant as we move into year 3. These events are important and useful as we plan the third years of your grants, as they give us things to focus on for improvement under the theme of constant improvement. So, with all that said, I would like to introduce Eric Bennett. And like I said, he's on the monitoring team with OET and in DCEO, and he's going to give you some information about what to expect and how to prepare for formal monitoring. Eric, take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good.
Yep.
Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome you all to the conference here today. Many of you all have had a chance to meet me earlier in the year. As Nate was saying, we were doing TA reviews and we came around to visit a few folks. And we kind of warned you at that point in time we'd be coming back with our official monitoring, which will happen in 2026. I am a fiscal monitor. And so today, what I'm going to be talking about primarily is on the fiscal side. There are program monitors who focus on other things, and they primarily look at your participants and how they're, coming to your programs and getting through your programs. But in today's conversation, my focus will be on the financial side. So, what I'd like to do is to kind of go through what a planned monitoring event will look like. And as we have come into this next year, we're going to begin those. As I speak today, many of you are larger organizations. You may be hubs. Many of you may be smaller organizations, maybe navigators. So as I speak, things are going to be in general. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is my name, which is Eric, ERIC, .m. Bennett with a double N and double T. So at illinois.gov. So if you have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me. And as I said before, some of the questions and some of the things may not respond to you directly if you're maybe a large organization or a small organization, but in general, we're going to do the same type of review as we come to each and every one of your organizations. So there are about 7 different areas I'm going to discuss this morning. And what we will do is to kind of give you an highlight of what's going to be talked about in each one of those areas. Some of you are large organizations and you may have additional grants and you may have gone through monitoring events with us, for previous grants, so you probably have a good idea of what to expect. Some of others are fairly new, and you may have questions. So as we go out through the day and the conference here this morning, feel free to just interrupt me at any time. This is not a lecture where I'm going to sit here and just talk to you for 25 minutes or half an hour. Um, if you've got questions, I'm sure someone else has that same question. So feel free to chime in. Some folks like to raise hands, but I won't mind if you just start talking or, and that kind of thing. All right. So the first area that we always take a look at is what we refer to as internal control. So this is basically a review of your policies. So there are a ton of policies, and in this particular case, it's usually not a place where we find issues because you are fairly new grantees early on in your award year, your grant years, and so most of the things that you need to do to get prepared to you know, to run the programs and operate as far as policies and procedures, you put all those things in place. So in most cases, what we do is we first of all review that the policies and procedures are in place. Many of you all got them in over the summer. And then we kind of take a look to make sure that you're following the policies. So as we move down our conversation today, we may come back to certain policies to review them, but there are a couple that I'm going to highlight that we always take a look at. The first area that is always important is procurement, purchasing, RFPs. So you should have a policy in place, and you probably do, which basically says this is how you're going to approve your purchases. This is how they're going to be paid for. This is how we're going to allocate funding to certain areas. So in any case, all those things should be in place. And as we get into our disbursements, which I'll talk about that a little bit later, as I said before, we're going to refer back to the fact that you do have policies in place, and it's primarily for approval before purchases are made. That's what we're looking for. And we will again review that. The next area of internal control, the next policies that we focus on is stipends and barrier reduction policies. Now, we're going to get to this conversation towards the end, a little bit heavier as to more of the details, but on the top of it, you all have written policies as to how you're going to issue your I'm just sliding over. Give me 1 second. How you're going to issue your disbursement. We have all those things in place. So each one of you has, a different wage you're going to award incentives, barrier reductions, things like that. But again, we just want to make sure that you're in compliance with federal regulations, the IRS, things like that. So again, as we start to get into stipends and barrier reductions, we're going to make sure that your policies are in line with federal regulations, and again, that you are following those. But again, we'll have more discussion about policies and that kind of thing a little bit later in the hour. The last thing we're going to take a look at is we're going to look at your environment overall, your staffing levels, your policies. So in other words, you should have policies in place which basically describe what people are going to do as far as their jobs, their duties, and from the executive director all the way down. So again, we look to see that those things are in place and that you have all the things that are necessary that would be required. So as I said before, as we get started with the first area, internal control, it's generally something where we don't find much of a problem. The second focus that we go into, by the way, were there any questions about that before I move on, or is that pretty clear? Okay. The second area that we get into, and again, these are general for most people. We kind of get into how you do your cash management and banking. So y'all are going to receive funds from the state. We basically want to make sure that you have received those funds, put them in a bank account. You do bank reconciliations to monitor the balances in your accounts and how payments are being made. We do take a look at cash on hand to make sure that uh, you don't have excess cash in hand. And in this particular round, we saw something where some folks had some cash and they may have earned a little bit of interest. So that requires a little bit of extra work as far as our DCEO accounting and our GRS systems. But again, we're going to make sure that um, you understand if there is interest, it has to be accounted for and then brought back into the program, and you have to demonstrate how you're doing those various things. So again, most of the time, these are things which are rare. They don't happen to everyone, but it could be possibly something that we see out there in the banking world. So as we've gone around over this year, we've seen that people use different styles of banking, and we can only recommend or suggest what you do with your funds. But we found that it's easy when people are able to separate their Ceja funds from their other grant funds into separate accounts. And as we get into doing our monitoring, we kind of, in some cases, will talk about these various ways to store the funds. Do you want to keep them with other funds, which requires extra accounting because you have to keep separate records? Or do you want to isolate those funds, which makes your accounting easier, but sometimes more difficult depending on your agency, your boards, and things like that who manage the funds. But in any case, we kind of review that as a part of the monitoring, and small or large, these are things that we basically are going to do. Okay, so those kind of things that we just talked about are in general, and as we get into the next levels of talking, it gets a little bit more detailed, and it comes to be a little bit more specific. So the next area we get into is your budgets and your disbursements. And, as you start out with the budget process, you have an idea of what you're going to spend, and you set up your budgets. And so you put information into the GRS all along, and we kind of monitor how your spending is going. But we also kind of come back and ask you to review your budgets throughout the time, and also ensure that your disbursements are being made according to what you've budgeted. So in certain cases, you'll get out there and you'll start working. You'll find we need to put more money into barrier reduction. We need to move some money out of administration. We need to move some more money into a different area. So again, what we look for are changes to budgets, things that I refer to as variances, where you're seeing that you're over budget in some cases and other under budget. And again, those are things that you should be changing throughout this year. As you get to December here, as you get to your quarterlies, you should again start to make adjustments to your budgets based on what you're seeing as actual disbursements. So when it comes to disbursements, we next take a look at what you're actually spending money on. And primarily, we look for authorization. Was this purchase authorized and approved by management or whoever is doing these various things? We look to make sure in some cases that you've made payment, you have a check in place, so it's gone out. We want to see an invoice so that you know you're paying correctly. We're looking to make sure you're not paying sales taxes. We do various things as we look at each particular invoice package to make sure that the proper things are in place that are necessary for approval. And then the last thing, as I said before, is we get back to this GRS system. And for those who've been working with the GRS system, there have been some challenges, and that's on everybody's end. But in any case, we've been able to work our way through it, and it's our primary way in the state to determine where the funds lie. Have they been issued out to the agencies and various things as far as expenditures? Have they been spent and uploaded into our systems? So again, we do all those various things as we review. All right. So depending on the agency, as I said before, it's going to be, well, larger, or I should say more days or than others. Some days could be one, some could be two, three, depending on the size, whether you're a navigator, whether you're a hub, various things like that. All right, the next major area that we talk about is payroll and stipends. And what we're going to do is we're going to, as fiscal teams, come in and take a sample. First of all, of your disbursements, we'll go through all of your disbursements and randomly choose. And then we're going to also look at your payroll and your participant stipends. And we're going to take a sample of those. And primarily, we're looking for the people who are staff. Did they have a time card? Was it signed by a manager? Was it signed by staff? Were proper payroll taxes withheld as far as Social Security, FICA taxes? You have other state taxes that are withheld. We're looking at your payroll for that. One thing that is, I'm hesitating because this is a hot button, is well, the $600 IRS limits, and so we kind of get into that. And so there's a lot of debate about that issue, and I'm not going to use this forum right now to debate it. However, um, you know, as payroll and incentives and things like that are being made, what we have to do is to refer to your policies and then make sure that if they are falling into a situation where they have to be given IRS documentation, that you are doing that. So again, each individual agency is different. So make that clear. Each individual agency is different. Um, there's discussion about terms in the wording, and how that clears up. That's, for me, it's not a fiscal issue. However, um, there are requirements that are must be done for the IRS, and as we come in to monitor, we're going to basically make sure you're following guidelines that are issued as far as tax and IRS requirements. But in any case, we're going to get into that. We're going to look into allocation of salary. So that's basically another budgeting thing. It goes back to the top as we return to talking about internal control and budgeting. So those are the two areas where we find most of the issues. They're going to be there in payroll or in the budget area. So again, as we come out there next year, you will be given a letter telling you what to prepare for us. Most of the time with fiscal monitoring, we ask that you submit things a week in advance, so we'll let you know what we're looking for, what our samples are going to be. And as I said before, the larger the organization, the larger the samples are, the larger the review, and the more time we spend. The smaller agencies, we're in there now 1 day, half day, depending. All right, there are other things to look at as far as your audit. We basically go back and look at what your external auditors have said. So we ask for a single audit or annual report or something which shows the agency's most previous accounting years that have been submitted. And so again, most people do that without a problem. And so we only have two areas left that I'm going to talk about. And I've been talking quite a bit. Did anybody have anything that they wanted to chime in and discuss before we hit these last areas? Okay. All right. That tells me somebody's got questions. All right. So, in any case, the next area, last couple, supportive services, barrier reduction. Okay. So, with fiscal monitoring, we focus on where the majority of the dollars are spent. And what we find is that barrier reduction, supportive services is a big area within this particular grant. We, as I said, going earlier, talking about policies, we're going to look at what your policies are as far as your barrier reduction. And we're going to see that, see what you're doing with it, how you're awarding it, if you're over awarding. I mean, you've set maximums in place. We're going to see if you're reaching your maximums, exceeding your maximums, you know, various things we're going to look at, but basically we're going to review everything that has to do with barrier reduction. And again, the larger the account line, so when I say training costs, when I say barrier reduction, when I look at other things, those larger items in your budget is where the fiscal team is going to focus most. And again, this is one area that is going to be reviewed. All right, the final area that we look at, and again, I've saved this one for last, is the subcontractors or people who you're working with as far as your partners. As agencies, you are responsible to monitor them. And the same way that we monitor you, you are to actually go out to your partners and take a look at them. And as we were coming through earlier in the year, many of y'all had plans in place already to keep tabs on what was going on. I shouldn't say that, but I'll put it that way. You're keeping tabs on what's going on, and you understand where the spending is, where you know the costs lie if the things are being done. And so what we basically do as far as subcontractors is we come out and we review, your overview of each one. The thing for myself, as coming into this thing at the beginning of the year, there were a lot of things that I had a chance um, um, to observe, I'll put it that way. And they weren't necessarily physical issues. And one of the areas, which is I call them program issues, but one of the areas of concern was finding people who are partners or contractors throughout the state. In parts of the state, there are more people available to provide the services, and in other parts, they're fewer and farther between. So one thing that we kind of do is kind of talk to most agencies to see how you've developed these relationships. And again, all physical monitoring is not where we're trying to gather information from what you've done. Some of it is about planning for the future. And so again, as we are talking today, we're thinking about what we're going to monitor. As I said, right now I'm just giving you general areas, but I'm not telling you specifically what we're going to do. And so again, as this is a work in progress, as it's starting out, I call it the mile-long freight train with four engines. We're getting it going. Now the train was stuck in the station in January. The train's rolling down the track. Hopefully it doesn't get out of control. So we got to keep it rolling and keep it rolling smoothly. But as I said before, part of the monitoring will be seeking information for future uh, programs, for future grantees. We see all of the things that you all are doing. At least I see them as continuing. There were some, hiccups getting started, but as I said before, I see this as a program that will continue down the road. So as I said before, part of the monitoring will be looking at reviewing what you have done. Part of the monitoring will be trying to anticipate what your needs are for the future. So again, from a fiscal side, we don't come into this is not a financial audit from the IRS. We're going to take your house or something like that. We come in to, first of all, review what you're doing, but also try to help you all to grow. Because again, we're all in this together. Whether you're working for the state on this side or working out there where you all on the other side, I consider all of us as just one program. I consider all agencies, be you a hub, be you a navigator, be you large, be you small. I consider everybody the same because the purpose is the same, to try to get training for our participants. So in any case, I appreciate the opportunity for y'all to let me come in here and speak today. If you do have questions, please feel free to email me. As I said, it's eric.m.bennett, BENNETT at illinois.gov. And, a lot of times there are questions where you don't want to ask in a group, and I get that. So I am free on every day, regular 8:35. And feel free to shoot me an email and I'll try to respond if you have any individual questions. So before I turn it back to Nate, was there anything else that people want to ask me, or did I miss anything, or did I confuse somebody? Was there anything else out there? All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity to let me come out and speak today. I will see you next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate you coming on and giving us a little heads up about what we need to be looking at for the monitoring. And like he said, if you have questions and you don't feel comfortable asking them in front of a big group here, I did put his email address in the chat. And you can also feel free to reach out to your RA with any questions about monitoring as well. But we'll also take any of your monitoring questions right now, or any other questions that you might have. So please feel free to type it in the chat or come off mute and ask away.
Hi, this is Tamara Now with AOE International. Can can someone elaborate a little bit more on the audit of our partners in terms of what it entails? Are you just going through their financials, looking at those aspects that relate to our particular grants versus all of their financials? So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I think so. And I see Eric coming onto the camera there. So I'll turn that over to him.
Okay. Um, the larger your examination, I'll put it like that, the further you go, the more you take a look at your partner, the better. Um, what some people do is they literally have all the partners send every disbursement, every payment to them, everything that they authorize, every dollar that you send to them. It has to be very, very detailed, because first of all, they have the participants out there in a lot of cases. I don't know if that's true with you, but whatever they pay the participants, that has to be very, very well detailed. If they give them uh, a $50 bonus for, achieving some objective, that has to be documented. Who did we give it to? What was it for? How much? And, there has to be some sort of system where they track that. So um, the detail, and again, I'm not sure how much detail you go into with your other grantees, but my only advice to you would be use much more detail this first year than you typically would for anyone else. So whatever you do for everybody else, double it. You know, uh, anything that they spend from a fiscal side, make sure you have that documented. From a program side, I can't speak to that, but it's the same thing. I mean, you want to have all the records. I've seen what program monitors do. So you want to have, participation, classroom attendance dates, whatever it is. It's just like college. Whatever you would do in a college program, that's the same thing you kind of do here as far as the financial side. If somebody's got to go in and look at um, primarily when you're looking at your partners, the money that's going to participants, the money that you're paying them, the expenses that they have. Sometimes you have to look at it. Are these expenses justified? If they say I want to buy, for example, a $10,000 laptop. That's not a justified expense. So part of what you have to do deals with approval. What are they approved to do? What did you tell them that you wanted them to do? And then what are they actually doing? So it's a matter of control, and so there's no maximum control. In other words, there's not too much that you can do. So whatever you're doing, do a little bit more. Any dollar that you send to them, should have, you know, if they spend something, they should have, for example, if they buy something, there should be a purchase order. This is just typical business. There should be a purchase order. There should be an invoice. There should be a check that they pay to that particular vendor. that you want to see for every single payment that that partner makes. If they make a payment to a participant, whether it's a payroll issue or an incentive or barrier reduction, you know, all of the documentation that you would have, you know, time cards, a copy of a paycheck, the copy of the paycheck shows us, in payroll, the copy of the paycheck shows all the tax stuff, so if you've got a copy of the paycheck, you've covered all your bases for payroll. So again, for your participants, for your partners participants, you need how they're paying their people. So a lot of people use electronic payment systems now, ADP. So again, it varies. Some people use an old fashioned, paper and pencil. Some people use, electronic with your fingertip or your eye, to sign in. So you have to look at your individual partner, but you have to oversee them, and so that's the difference. Even though they may be classified as your partner, they are really your sub, and you're responsible for every dollar that you give them and every dollar that they claim they spend. And so, again,
Eric, would
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, would it be safe to say, like, that since the terms of the overall grant agreement apply to the sub-grantees as well as the grantee, that, like, essentially the same kind of minimal rules and requirements for documentation that apply to the grantee should also apply to the sub-grantee?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
that's, as a minimum, that's what you want to do. Thank you for that question. That's a good question.
And that's helpful. Thank you. One follow-up question to that. Is there a checklist that we can reference? So that way
There,
at the start of the grant, since this will be our first year, we can already have that in place.
yes,
For them. Okay.
we do have several different uh, monitoring lists where we go down. It's a list of what you should cover. So we have something that we can give you, which is a basic form. So Tamara, just shoot me an email if you could.
I
Just
sure
just say
will.
hello email, and then that way I'll find something and I'll get back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so
Nice.
much.
And then I see a similar question in the chat. And so, Eric, I think also worth mentioning that we'll send out letters in advance of our monitoring visits, like aim to be about 4 weeks ahead of time, that will lay out the documents that we'll want you to produce that we'll review during that monitoring session. Is that right, Eric?
That's right. So it comes out and it lays out all the things we'll be looking for. It, and it also describes the documents that we will be seeking as far as program and on the fiscal side. That comes out 30 days in advance, at least.
Cool. What else are folks wondering about?
See a
Yeah, I see
question.
another question.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Well, yeah. Oh,
No,
you
just
didn't finish it.
I was just gonna say I see another question there about barrier reduction, and generally the as long as you follow the general barrier reduction policy of the state, and if you and each grantee should have their own barrier reduction policy as well. So we will be monitoring across both the barrier reduction policies that the state has stipulated, as well as what you have locally. And if that includes, and it should include, things like uh, allowable expenses, caps on expenses, things of that nature.
Thank you, sir.
Mhm.
Who else? What else can we cover? When do you anticipate starting these reviews? Yes, after January 1st, we hope to have the letters sent out in January. I believe we've got on the calendar, we've got I think February 9th is when we'll start with these. Maybe it's February 2nd, I'm sorry, February 2nd, but we will get that. Obviously, the date you receive the letter will be kind of timed to when the monitoring event will be. So expect those to start coming out early January. And then, like I said, the formal monitoring um, requires some more coordination with the monitoring team. And so we're kind of taking those 1 week at a time, where we'll do one event 1 week, another event a different week, another event a different week. Kind of concurrently with that, we're going to be doing another round of TA. So the difference between the formal monitoring and the TA, the formal monitoring will be done by Eric and his monitoring team, whereas the TA is kind of a lighter touch, like I said, kind of a monitoring light, like we did last year, and that'll be conducted by the Ceja team. And so those will be happening concurrently, but kind of around on that same timeline. So after the first of the year, we'll get the letters out, and then those events will start February into March through May.
Nate, do you know how many years are going to be covered under this monitoring?
Eric, I guess I haven't had that question before. Would we look at just the previous year's activity, or would it look at all the years of the grant?
Typically, we're going to probably look at the entirety of the grant. So, in many cases, what happened, we have kind of combined these into 2 years. So, we will be looking at, I'll just put it like that, the entirety of the grant, because some folks got started a little earlier, some got started a little bit later, but we're looking at the funds that have been spent. And we would usually go back to the most recent year, which would be whatever, September 84 to September 85, and maybe calendar year 2025. But again, it's going to go back to the very beginning, depending on how you all started, because folks started in different times.
Thank you. What other questions do we have? Eric, we got one more question. What is the size of the sample?
Okay, that varies. Typically, I'm just going to give you a percentage. We usually use 5% of the um, disbursements. So, in other words, if you have a $500,000 grant, that comes into whatever it would be. So we get 5% of the volume and then 5% of the numbers. So if you have 100 for disbursements, it would maybe be 5% would be five, but we're going to do more than that. But typically 20, that's a good number. The smaller agencies 10, so we actually came to a few of the navigators and they were small, so we may have looked at 5 or 10, but it depends on your size. And um, to give you a little hint about, sampling, the larger items we kind of look at, the more odd items, a one and done purchase, we're going to look at that. Things such as utilities where you got to pay electric bill every day. We don't, that's something we're not going to look at, and so there are certain things we do sample, certain things that we don't. But anything that I would tell you that requires approval by more than one person is grounds to get sampled, so that typically would be everything from the smart minor $25 purchases on something like that. But dollar wise, we get the size that matters. That helps. That draws the sample, draws us to sample sizes, and then also the number.
Eric, I don't know if you mentioned this before, but organizations that Ceja grantees that also have other grants with uh, DCO's Office of Employment and Training. We are trying to coordinate those, aren't we? So that for instance, if one of your partners is, or if the hub is an OWIA, for instance, with the WIOA grant, then we're trying to coordinate the monitoring for CEJA with that alongside that monitoring for WIOA.
Yes. We have some agencies where that's easier to do than others.
Mhm.
And so there were a few that we came to last year, and you know who you are, that we already have you down to a monitor for February or March, and you have CEJA funds, so we will be doing that monitoring there for those large OEs out there. Uh, some will be added, so as we're putting together our schedule over the next week or so, we will be adding to. So some of you have already been scheduled for maybe a JTED monitoring, or maybe a FIJA monitoring, or maybe some other type of grant monitoring. So we're going to try, as Larry is saying, to combine uh, events if we have a person who has multiples. So that's a good question, Larry. Yes, if they are a large organization, they're an LWIA, we will be monitoring CEJA and all the grants when we visit those. And if their partners are getting monitored, we'll probably still do something separately. But again, that's going to be left up to other folks to make that decision uh, as we move into the new year.
I just want to say really quick too that I know we have some really new grantees coming on board and some that just started. We typically have weekly to bi-weekly meetings with your RA as well as your grant manager. So during these weekly meetings, feel free to discuss any topics like monitoring so we can be sure and capture your question and help you get those answered too.
And I'm not certain if this was stated explicitly or not before, but if you are just one of the grantees who is just starting, it's most likely you will only get a TA review as opposed to a full monitoring, because there typically won't be too many fiscal or financial expenses that will need to be reviewed. Because I think that our plan last year was that we wanted to make sure everyone got a TA review, and then we move into monitoring. So for those who are kind of just starting, most likely yours will just be a TA review. Is that right, uh, Nate?
Yep, that's my understanding too. Yep.
Mhm.
So you'll have a chance to talk through it with an RA or a grant manager in advance of the formal monitoring, which will likely come either next year probably, or later this year, I guess, but I would think more than likely next year. All right. Are there any other questions we can tackle here? All right. Well, if not, we will end it there. Ba, 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 ba. Oh, we did have one more. Will you be looking at paper files or electronic?
Uh, well, paper's beautiful. However, folks are a little bit conservative these days. Um, Typically what happens are a lot of electronics, a lot of records now are electronics. As far as purchasing is electronic, everything is moved. So we used to do paper records, and that is always easier to work with if you ask me, as opposed to having one screen where I got to flip through a whole bunch of stuff. But either way, as I said before, most folks are moving to electronic versions, and that's kind of what we expect to see. But paper's a great thing, so either way.
Cool. Thank you. All right. All right. Well, yeah, if there are no other questions, I'll pause again. All right. We will end it there. Um, but be sure to uh, reach out to your RA or to Eric. We've got his email in the chat there. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you do have further questions about monitoring or anything else. Your RA is a good contact for those anything else questions. And we thank you for your time. And let's see, our next session is scheduled for Tuesday, December 16th. And I think we're going to have our friends from monitoring come back and talk a little bit more about that process. I think we're going to try to cover program monitoring one of these next sessions. So be on the lookout for that, and hope you have a good week. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.